these offices for Transport Planning Society's evening meeting. It's an honour to be hosting the Society, who are here this afternoon for their board meeting as well. Just some housekeeping before we start. We aren't expecting fire alarm. So if one does go off, there's our exits there and there, but please follow just the WSP people. You can't miss me tonight, folks. Do want to. And the master point is at the Peace Garden. And for anybody who comes on facilities, there are large amounts of vehicles over there and small ones over there, so that's where they are. Mark, if you just want to say a few words about the society.
Thank you, Anna. Welcome everybody. My name is Mark Ross. I'm the current chair of the Transport Planning Society. We'll be for 6 months. Thank you so much for coming today. Big thank you to WSP for hosting this event on behalf of WSP and also for extending that generosity throughout the afternoon for our TPS board meeting today. Fabulous cast of speakers. I don't have myself among them, so I want to get back and hear what you guys have got to say. Then one very quick plug for the society. We're 25 years old this year. Before us, there was no transport planners, or nobody that could transport planners. We were part of engineering, so it was really great that in 1997 people came together and created this society. We're keen to celebrate that achievement. We have a campaign called Transport Planning Day, which I can plausibly say, possibly, that you will know is 14th of November of this year. But they're really proud of my performance at the moment. Everybody celebrates that and marks that opportunity. We're thinking back over the last 25 years, what have been the most important changes that have happened to the transport sector, what have been the most consequential things that have happened. Also looking forward to the next 25 years, what must happen over what I think is going to be a really interesting and challenging and sometimes very scary ride for transport planning in that period. So really hope that everybody gets involved in that. Big thank you to our members, both individual and also our stakeholder company members who make all these sorts of events possible. And yeah, Anna, I'll hand off back over to you. Look forward to hearing from the speakers.
Okay, so I should have said last time, thank everybody online here. Could somebody do a thumbs up and Lisa, you getting any response from anybody? No. Oops. Is that on green? That's on green. Can anybody type in the chat box if they can hear us?
I can hear you.
So this evening we've got 3 speakers, all on topics which are around sustainable transport investment and obviously in Birmingham, most recently about major events. To start off with, we've got Anshul, who's the Executive Director at Transport for West Midlands, and appointed permanently to the post beginning of this year, having held it as an interim post previously to that. I've known Anna Ryan around network development issues, and now she's heading up transport for the region, so it's an absolute honour to be around. We've got Simon on the national step up.
Just stand over there as well for people online. Yeah, and I'm assuming it's a button or a spinning.
Yes, the up and down button.
Okay, so Dr. Lee, you just worked out who I am as well. So I thought I'd just give you a little bit of a background about what the Commonwealth Games is all about and why it's really important to plan the operational side of Commonwealth Games as well as the facilities that are going to be used from a transport perspective as well. So monitoring sports, it started off with fewer than that, but over the period for planning, they added more sports and they added more venues. So it was a constant change. And of course, we only had about 4.5 years to do this planning. Normally, you would get about 7.5 years. So quite a compressed timescale in terms of the amount of work that needed to be done. And also, it's not just in Birmingham, although it's Birmingham Commonwealth Games and Birmingham City Council or the host city. We had a number of venues that were all around the region and one down in London at Lee Valley for the cycling as well. So sort of bigger geography, I think was really important for us to understand how we were going to move something like 1.5 million ticketed spectators alongside all of the background demand, as well as making sure the athletes got to competition on time, using the same sort of transport infrastructure, particularly road networks and so on. And then there's a whole load of officials that are sort of like managing the events, all the workforce as well, thousands and thousands of workforce, including contractors, volunteers and so on. So a huge volume of people that we needed to get around the region whilst keeping the network working. And of course we wanted to make sure that that was sustainable as well, which is the theme for tonight. We also moved from a central village. So normally for Commonwealth Games and Olympics, you have one big village where all the athletes go. But because of COVID, and I didn't realise that when we went and won the bid for this, that we'd be planning in a pandemic, but we have managed to pull it off. But unfortunately, some of the construction around some of the big venues, particularly the Athletes Village, was affected, and there was no guarantee that the Athletes Village over at Perry Barn would be finished in time. So to de-risk that, they used 3 campuses. In fact, there was actually 5 villages. They also used a few hotels in the city centre for the cricket teams, which was a female cricket teams, which was a sport that was added as well. So that made it more complex in terms of the movements as well. So we needed to really think about how we kept the whole network working. And of course, visitors are coming from all over the world. There's over 70 nations and territories as part of the Commonwealth. So we had to make sure that we were accommodating all of those requirements, arrival into the UK, those ports of entry, whether it was Heathrow or Birmingham Airport or the Eurostar, whatever. But once they arrived in this region, how are we going to help them sort of to move around as part of that as well? So quite a complex set of requirements that were sort of built into how we planned what the operational side of it was. But also, as the Statutory Transport Authority in this region, we were given the responsibility, although the event is through the Birmingham 2022 Organising Committee, Birmingham City Council are the host city, because of the geography, Transport for West Midlands as the statutory authority was given the job of producing a statutory transport plan. And this really just set out the framework in terms of what we wanted to do the planning to, but also it gave us powers of direction through the Secretary of State if we had any difficulty in getting partners to sort of play their part as well. Transport isn't just about Transport for West Midlands. We've got, in the Games, we had 9 local highway authorities, national highways, all the rail operators, all the bus operators, who were all commercial operators, alongside Network Rail, who look after the rail infrastructure. As I say, it was actually quite a complex set of partners on a transport perspective, and then add that into the partnership, the broader partnership for the Commonwealth Games as well. It was my job to sort of convene that partnership, to get that level of cooperation and to do the planning across that breadth of it as well. So we needed a statutory transport plan that set out those core principles. So clean and green public transport games, that was our first priority. We wanted people who were going to the events to use public transport. And that also meant that we had to make sure public transport was fit for purpose, it was reliable, it was accessible, and then affordable. So I'll come on to that in a bit. Safety is also a requirement as well. So safe and secure, of course, we did quite a lot of work alongside West Midlands Police, who had the responsibility for making sure safety and security were part of the games as well, just given that sort of level of people who are here, the dignitaries that are here as well. It could become a target as well. So we needed to make sure that the transport, both the services and the transport hubs, the stations and so on, were safe and secure. We also wanted to make sure we minimise disruption. So we have just over 3 million residents and I don't know how many businesses here in the West Midlands that still needed to go about their daily activities. It was a school holiday, so schools were shut, but there was still, that background demand still needed to be catered for. We also needed to manage that background demand, so try to suppress it where we could as well. And then we also wanted to make sure that we got some long-term sustainable benefits out of what transport stuff was for the games as well. And then, of course, the Commonwealth Games, I quite like the way that those events play out, because it's able-bodied sports alongside para sports as well. So making sure that the whole event was accessible for all, not just for the athletes, but also for all the supporters that were coming. That was a real key component for us to think about as well. We had a bit of a structure around who's going to do these bits of work as well. Obviously, the Games family were looking after the athletes, the officials, the media, the various clients that they've got, their arrivals and departures, people who are participating as well. So we work very closely with them as part of a sort of one transport team approach. We've got quite a bit of transport infrastructure that needed to be built. So within the bid, we set out all the things that were already in our delivery plan around new transport infrastructure that would facilitate the Games. There was only one scheme that wasn't in our plan, and I'll come on to that in a bit. And then, of course, we needed to think about that regional spectator and transport requirements as well. So that was shortened down to RASTO as part of that. So that became a common phrase over the last 3.5 years. And that was that background in hand alongside making sure that visitors to this region who were coming for this event or for the more cultural events that were sort of wrapping around it had a really good experience and came, will come back again, because that's part of that as well. So in the spectator transport stuff, we obviously needed to strengthen the existing public transport. Now, when we started this journey, that was not be easy, won't it? But no, we had COVID, and we had a network of public transport that just completely reduced in service, just core workers during the height of the pandemic, and that's been really difficult to build back up again and to rebuild confidence and get people using public transport. We are still not back on the same levels of people using public transport, so that again is a challenge. So how do we give people confidence of using public transport when maybe they're still a little bit nervous as part of that? So we factored that all into the planning. Of course, that's a legacy. If we can get people really reconnected with public transport post-COVID as part of Commonwealth Games, then that is a real legacy for us, because we'll build that patronage and get those sustainable journeys back again as well. Active travel plays a big part, so walking and cycling, not just for people attending the events as part of demand management to suppress the background, and then additional temporary transport services. So lots of shuttle buses. When you start to do the modelling and the forecasting, you can see where your capacity gaps are, and you need to fill those gaps with those dedicated transport services, so shuttle buses, and ride locations, and so on. And then, of course, our big concern was around how the traffic network would perform as well, because in the West Midlands we are the third most congested location in the region. So how do we make sure that we're able to sort of fit all of that extra demand in this region, whilst also catering for the needs of this region, particularly around business movements and things like that as well. So a fair challenge, I think you'll agree, in terms of what we needed to do here for that as well. I won't go into that slide, that's a bit boring. So what we've got is quite a bit of capital investment. So we had a couple of bus rapid transit schemes, so the A34 and the A45. They connected the main Alexander Stadium on the A34 to the north and to Birmingham city centre, and then on the A45 connecting through that eastern corridor through to the airport, through to the NEC, where there was also events as well. Into Birmingham city centre. So those two schemes as phase one have now been delivered. They were delivered just ahead of the Commonwealth Games, and that gives us dedicated bus lanes for the new rapid transit service Sprint as it gets delivered, as we get into phase two delivery, which we're starting now, but also for all buses. And of course, those lanes were used by the buses, those particular shuttle services that were put in as well. We also had tram extensions that have been opened, so the new extension through Broad Street that connects up to Five Ways, that opened just ahead of the Games as well, and of course that also provided us with resilience on the public transport system through the rail corridor through to Wolverhampton as well. So really important for us to be able to make sure that the tram was operating effectively, opening that extension and connecting people to the events that were also happening in Wolverhampton. Rail stations, so we had university was already in our plan. That was never intended to be fully open, and it's still not fully open yet ahead of the Commonwealth Games, but we did manage to get a 2-stage entry into service to have wider platforms for the extra number of people, and also the public realm outside the front was used for all the queuing systems as well, to make sure that we could manage people safely into and out of the station for the events that were happening over at University Station. Perry Barham was the station that was in nobody's plan. Our guys over there from TFW, we haven't done a business case or anything, had you, for this? So we had to very rapidly put the business case together. If anybody has visited Perry Bar Station in its former state, it was the most awful station, and absolutely not what you would expect visitors in this region to have as their main station to take them to where the opening and closing ceremonies were going to happen. So pretty dire. But it's done a fantastic job. I think within 12 months, the business case was agreed, the funding was agreed, the delivery was done within 12 months, and the station was opened. And there was also other things that were added into scope by Network Rail, so to improve the cross-haul on the platform as well. So with that, it now leaves a sort of bit of a landmark station in Perry Bar, next to where the new housing that what was supposed to be the village is happening, and so we, really connecting that location beyond the games as well. So I think that's a really big achievement for the people who were involved in getting that station agreed, designed, built and opened as well. There's also a number of cycling upgrades that we have, particularly in Birmingham, as part of Birmingham Cycle Revolution, and of course the Cycle Hire scheme that we've rolled out across the West Midlands as well. So making sure that that cycle infrastructure was in place, connecting again on the A38 to the university site, also to Birmingham City Centre, and also up to the A34 to Perry Bar as well, so that we could encourage more sustainable journeys, particularly for people who live more locally. But that wasn't just restricted. What we did in the end is we offered 2 30-minute rides on the Cycle Hire scheme to encourage not just people going to the games itself, but also for that background demand for those local journeys. And I think one of the stats that I've got is that as part of that, we massively increased the use of the Cycle Hire scheme, and we cycled around the world twice. So no mean feat there as well. There's also a number of road upgrades, not least to do with HS2 works, but also some of the motorway in particular around that as well. So working with National Highways, we wanted to make sure that their schemes were done and out of the way, or if they weren't due to complete, could we sort of drop back a bit and just make sure that we were managing the capacity as well. And then one of the things that we've done in Transport for West Midlands, and we don't do it 2 years prior, was the Regional Transport Coordination Centre, and that is where actually we bring together all of those different transport partners, the operators, Network Rail, British Transport Police, West Midlands Police, TFWM, and our local highway authorities connecting into their UTCs to sort of convene and manage the network holistically. So that we could understand this is what was planned, this is how the network was going to work, these are the incidents that we were managing. So we had all the partners in the room at the same time who were solving those problems together, rather than being in disparate control centres. And of course, that was also then linked back into the wider control centres that are part of the games as well. And that was originally constructed or built as a concept, and that partnership created to help us minimise disruption through quite a lot of the investment programme that we've got doing, things like HS2, what's happening on the investment programme with National Highways and other projects that all of our local authorities have got as well. So that was the sort of beating heart, if you like, of what we had on our capital investment that we've made, and the beating heart of how we manage the operation for Commonwealth Games. And because we needed to think about and plan for each venue what all the different kinds of transport modes were going to be. We needed to make sure where we could connect in with rail, where there was bus shuttles, they've added extra services, where there was bus strengthening as part of that as well. The locations that the tram was serving, all venues, walking and cycling, because we also added in secure cycle parking, both for workforce and also for people who were going to the events. And then a number of the key venues, were the big ones, had sort of park and ride locations as well. And the reason for that is that around all of the venues, there was no parking. And then, of course, a lot of the venues are in or near residential areas. And we wanted to make sure that people didn't park in residential streets, because that would be quite disruptive for local residents and local businesses.
So we also introduced, to discourage that, local area traffic management plans, and all local people who lived in those streets had vehicle permits so that they could park there. But anybody else who parked there was going to get a ticket as well. So we used a little bit of stick and some incentives to use the parking, and all the parking rides were pre-bookable as well, so that we could understand the numbers. And then we did have a couple of park and walk locations as well. So there's quite a lot of people that we needed to try to cater for. The Games Route network itself was quite extensive, so over 700 kilometres of road network that we needed to look at and work out how we were going to keep that functioning. There was no way that we could introduce what everybody was asking us to do, was games lanes for dedicated routes for the organising committee Traffic Against Family. We had to share the road space with everybody that needed to use it. We just had to manage it. And we took a risk management approach where we were looking at what are the key hotspots and just to make sure that we keep the network moving. And actually, I'm quite surprised because this was one of our big concerns, but the road network worked much better than ever, even with the extra demand. So we probably learnt a few lessons there about how we can manage that road network effectively. And of course, it carries the tram, it carries buses, it carries bikes. It's not just about cars as well. So I want to talk about the local area traffic management plan. So these are the locations around the venues where we prevented people from rocking up and parking, annoying the residents as well. And of course, we had to do quite a lot of engagement work with local people to make sure that we got that right. They understood how they got their vehicle permits and just keep them happy in terms of what we were doing as well. And they were quite grateful, I think, for the protection that we gave them. And we also needed to build in some resilience into the network as well. So this happened on, I think it was the Sunday. So I was waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to deal with the flood over in Warwickshire, which was on the access to the venue there. Looked outside, this is not far from our office. Looked outside to see this. Everyone's panicking, oh my God, we've got flood and we've got fire, what's going on? And it just turned out to be that building was right on the Games Route network as well. So that meant that we had to divert all the traffic off that route, including our shuttle buses to Alexander Stadium, whilst the fire service were dealing with that fire, which lasted for some time. And then, of course, building control has to come in, have to check that building, was it safe, could we reopen the road? So we had a situation where we didn't know, and of course the diversion route took the buses to sort of junctions around Dartmouth Circus and Newtown Row, and made it quite inefficient. So we did have a backup GRN that we've done some work on with improved traffic signals and things like that as well. And of course that just provided us with that additional resilience. That's the Regional Transport Coordination Centre. This was the last night, the last shift, and these are the people that were hidden away in that room on that last shift, who were just making sure they're all from all sorts of different organisations, making sure that everything was going to plan. So this was on the night of the closing ceremony, and they were there till midnight, making sure that all the services had finished, everybody had got home, and reopening some of the sort of temporary road closures that were in place that day as well. We also, I've mentioned the bus fleet that we had. So we had a contract with Stagecoach for bus shuttles. There were 3 contracts, one for the police because they needed to transport a lot of police officers that had come in to the region to support it. One for the organising committee to get athletes and officials to and from the venues, from those accommodation. And then, of course, thousands of people who were using the shuttle bus services from Birmingham City Centre and other locations over at West Bromwich, where we were taking people over to Sandhurst Aquatics as well, and Coventry, over to the Coventry Arena. So quite a big bus operation, buses from all over the country. And of course, we've had in our contract around that to make sure that those buses, given that we've got Clean Air Zone, and Steve's going to talk about that in a bit, but we needed to make sure that those buses were compliant with those Clean Air Zone requirements, so Euro 6 for diesel or above or better. And so that was a stipulation within that one, and that's what we achieved as part of that. We also had quite a lot of people in Network Rail that were making sure that the infrastructure was working on the rail network as well. Nobody told me that I was also going to be planning and delivering this during Rail Industrial Action. So we actually managed to keep the rail network working even though West Midlands trains were on strike, their manager drivers actually turned up, got trains out and ran a shuttle service on the day of the strike between the NEC and Birmingham as well. And that just shows the dedication of the people in the transport industry to make this a really successful event. But there were lots of people in Network Rail, lots of volunteers as well, who were sort of doing the meeting and greeting and guiding people, all in pink high-vis vests, which I'm sure we'll all keep as souvenirs as part of that. And of course, lots of entertainment that was going on to create that spectator experience. We did have a few issues. We had a bit of cabling theft as well, which disrupted a few trains, but we had British Transport Police working with us, and they were really proactively managing that as well. So they prevented what could have been a much worse situation, so we could keep trains moving and make sure everybody got around. So as I've mentioned as well, so the cycle hire scheme was really successful. I've already given you some intel around that. Cycle parking, this was actually at Cannock Chase where we had the cycle race. So it's quite a rural location, so brilliant that quite a few people turned up there, but of course it was a cycling event. So that's good. And then of course we borrowed Birmingham City Council's cargo bikes as well to do some deliveries. We had lots of stuff out and about on the network, and we needed to deliver food, water and all those sort of welfare things as well. So we used those as part of that, which meant that we could get around the city centre in particular quite easy. What was important for us as well, maybe, you know, the organising committee are thinking about the experience for the athletes and making sure the televised stuff looks really good and the closing ceremonies. Our job was to make sure that the customer experience, the visitor experience was really good, and we had loads of, because it went so well, we had quite a lot of comments. I've just got a few up there, which I'll let you read at your leisure. But there was a lot of people. I think there's one comment on there that I've just witnessed the best mass transit movement for thousands and thousands of people ever seen, and I think that's what happens when you make transport free. So effectively, as part of your venue ticket, you can use all the public transport. So that incentivisation. You do a demand management programme that suppresses demands and you know, prevents people from actually thinking that driving their car is an option. It's a lot of visitors, so how do you manage that as well? But also there was quite a lot of regional and local people who took to using the bus shuttles. And then what we saw over the week was, because people realised that the shuttle buses were working effectively, actually we saw more and more people using them, so our numbers grew for the events every day. We saw it in the very first few days, what we call park and hide. So people had parked quite a distance from the venue and walked, but we saw less of that as the event went on as well. So that was a good outcome for us. We also produced some tools, so digital tools, the journey planner, and the journey planner as well also recorded. You could save your preferred journey, find your event, find your transport, save your journey, and we also encourage people to save the journey back as well, because some of the events finished quite late at night, so people did need to check that. But it also had a carbon calculator on it as well, so just to get you thinking about what kind of journey I'm making. Actually, the carbon footprint will be less if we're doing that. So, and of course, we'd be able to get all the metrics out of that as well, so that we can do some evaluation afterwards. And then there was a whole Get Set for the Games programme as well. So this was the big communications, the big travel demand management piece. So a lot of engagement with local people, local businesses, and also with the freight and logistics community as well. So they understood what was happening, where it was happening, where is it likely to be busy, what can they do to avoid it, what do they need, particularly if they live locally, you know, their parking permits, so on, but encouraging them to think about remoding their journeys in terms of background demand, rerouting, retiming, or removing some of those journeys as well. And that worked really successfully, and there's quite a lot of engaging materials that sort of came out as part of that, which was sort of everywhere. I'm sure for those of you that were here in Birmingham, we're just happy you will see these all over bus stop locations, on the Eye, in New Street Station. So the message was out there, and also to encourage So there was lots of engagement activities face to face in local communities around venues, because we needed to reach a lot of people for the background demand who would normally use those strategic routes, but then also people who were visiting, to get them to think about how they're going to travel and to promote the services that we provided as well. So quite a few of those things, and we did quite a bit of city dressing with Network Rail, and made sure that that look and feel was also connected to the games branding as well, so that people would understand what it's all about, and just got that message out there. And what we actually did see, and there is some evaluation work going on now in terms of the numbers of people. I think it's 650,000 bus services that ran between all the venues, and that accounts for I don't know how many people as well. Sustainability was obviously, this is a snapshot report that's just been published by DCMS. So it's got something like over 7,500 personal bikes used, as well as our cycle hire scheme, 28,000 bike rides on a cycle hire as well, and that huge increase that we saw. And we're collecting all of these metrics as well to make sure that we can demonstrate how the techniques, the planning that we've done, the modelling and forecasting that we've done ahead of this, the services that we've then designed, developed and delivered, actually did the job as well. And it's nice to see that some of that's been recognised within the DCMS snapshot report that was published earlier this week. And then of course it takes people. So one of the big legacies for me is the cooperation that we've had from all of the different partners in transport. Didn't have to ask the Secretary of State to use any sort of power of direction. Everybody wanted to make it a success, and it wasn't just transport people. We had, West Midlands Police that were helping us with the road traffic network. We had plans in place to deal with any incidents, accidents, etc. As well. And all of these people made sure that the customer experience, whilst they were there, people using the shuttle buses, and leaving Alexander Stadium, getting in the shuttle bus queue that kept moving, dancing to YMCA, being loaded onto buses, and some of them, people reporting on social media that I can't believe I've just come out of Alexander Stadium and I'm back in the city centre within 15 minutes, which wouldn't normally do that, would you, from Terry Barstow? That's pretty good. And then this was the last night. That's most of the team. That was actually 4 o'clock in the morning. Closing ceremony. Looks like daylight, doesn't it? But the lighting's obviously good there, which takes a lot of people in terms of planning and then delivering the operation, and that's not everybody, of course. And without those people, you're talking about your transport planning day. This is filled with transport planners who became transport operators throughout the event and got a real joyful experience from it. I think that's me done. So that was a bit long.
So this is Dan Greeley. How did you manage the highway network with planned works? Were there embargoes on certain routes during the games? Did you have to implement any hostile vehicle mitigation, permanent or temporary?
Yes, and yes. So yes, there was HVM. So the police did all of their risk assessments and decided where all the HVM needed to go. Most of it was temporary. There was some investment in the Birmingham City Centre for more permanent HVM. So there's a bit of legacy amount of that as well. And of course, we had to integrate that design with the transport planning design as well. And yes, we had a freight logistics and also a utility group was looking at what works for review, and we did put the voluntary embargoes on that as well. So we had a period where we actually had no roadworks on anywhere except for national highways, of course, and HS2. But that really helped us as well because it meant we could preserve the capacity as well.
More on that? Okay, I'm going to ask one before going to the room. You got awarded a year later, I think, because of Durban dropping out, COVID, train strikes, lots of curveballs. What was your biggest curveball, do you think?
I don't really think about it. We just stuck with every problem that came our way. I think So we were originally bidding for 2026. Of course, Durban removed from it, so the bid then was around doing it for 2022. So that meant that we had a limited time scale. But I think we understood, so we didn't really understand the scale of what this event was like. I was fortunate enough to go to the Gold Coast for previous ones. I suddenly realised, oh my God, this was massive, and it's going to take quite a lot of people to do this. So I think we cope with that. The big one, obviously, adjusting to working during COVID, and then in the planning, not knowing whether COVID was still going to be a thing.
Yeah.
You know, in the early days, I thought it was only going to be a couple of months. Oh, it might be, I might be 4 years. But actually, you know, we had to have COVID safe requirements throughout. A lot of us are still doing that now in our workplaces and on the services that we provide as well. So that probably was the biggest thing, because it had to adjust everything.
Yeah.
But it didn't just adjust the planning, it adjusted the network. I think only now, really, I'm looking at Dan, only now really the network has really started to settle down into some sort of plateau pattern. Doesn't mean to say it won't change again, but trying to sort of do some modelling and forecasting to understand what you were doing was really, really difficult. We had to make some broad assumptions. But I think what we did is we set ourselves a target. Actually, let's not worry about the fact that people aren't using public transport as much. Let's encourage everyone to do it. And then that gives people confidence, and hopefully post games, more people will be using public transport in this region.
Do we have any questions in the room, Mark?
Actually, just flipping that question, so what do you think the greatest legacy was of the event, for a longer term legacy? And were there any sort of tactics or sort of operational things that you employed in games time you didn't actually know? We can use that in normal times as well.
So for me, the biggest legacy is the partnerships. So we've always worked with, you know, all the different authorities, but maybe not on anything this scale. And you get a reluctant, you know, working together kind of thing. But everybody saw the value, that Regional Transport Coordination Centre. And the legacy that's happening now is that we've now got National Highways in there more often. Even now, National Express are located in there. We've got West Midlands Trains sort of looking at Network Rail, making sure that they've got people in there. So we normally have quite a skeleton staff until we've got something that we're dealing with. But we get more and more people are choosing to locate there. And then from that, for me as well, the biggest legacy was about how do we create a better customer experience in this region that really encourages people to use public transport as a first choice rather than a must-have choice as well. And that's something I'm talking to my team about. How do we make sure that we put that customer experience back at the top of our agenda as Transport for West Midlands as well, because that's what will help us grow patronage in a sustainable way. You know, we don't want to encourage journeys that don't need to happen, but we want to encourage journeys sustainably that are happening, and again just remove that dependency on a single car.
I'll take one more question. I think you had your hand up.
So it's really great that the cost of local transport funding things, the ticket price, enabling better experience for visitors, better experience for staff because they get constructing passengers rather than road protection. Has that taught anything in people's willingness and propensity to use public transport and their private elasticity that we didn't already know?
I think it probably will do once we've done the full analysis. It's a great incentive, isn't it, to have free transport? But there were still people who chose not to do it. They were at the fringes. More and more people got confident that it was working. I think the thing that I take away from that is if you're going to give people free transport, or you're going to encourage people to use public transport through whatever fiscal mechanism, it has to be reliable and it has to be punctual. It has to actually get them to where they want to go within the time frame that they want to do, and connect them to the things that they're doing as well. So I don't think pricing is the only thing from what I see, but it's certainly a big encourager.
Thank you, Anne. That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Next up, we've got Stacey Dowling. Stacey's technical director in the transport team in WSP. Stacey's got 30 years experience of delivering multidisciplinary projects for the public sector predominantly. and is currently our project manager leading the Active Travel England audit work. And I'll just double check I'm getting all our partners' names right, along with Mott MacDonald, Phil Jones Associates, Urban Movement and Methods for DFT establishing Active Travel England. Stacey?
So now I'm mistakenly having to introduce myself. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present today. So today, work here. So today I'm going to give a quick overview of what Active Travel England is and what their role is. A little bit of detail about what we've been involved in as a team to support the setup of Active Travel England, and then some thoughts on what key components are required in order to, make a step change in active travel, and whether Active Travel England is going to facilitate that. So sorry if you already know this, but just to give an overview of people that maybe don't know. So Active Travel England actually have only been established for 5 weeks now. At the moment, they've got about 20 staff in post, and they're aiming to have about 98 in total, and they're currently recruiting. So Chris Boardman at the top, he is the National Commissioner and has the overall responsibility for Active Travel England. And the CEO is Jenny Williams, who's on the left in the middle. He comes from a media background, and the COO is Louise Wilkinson, and she's come from the Cabinet Office. She's the only female on the slide. In the bottom left is Graham Grant, and he's about the only one of the senior team. He hasn't actually started in post yet. He will be the Director of Planning, and he's currently Assistant Director at Newcastle City Council. And then finally, Brian Deegan. Maybe a lot of you know Brian Deegan. He's an expert in cycling infrastructure and cycling design. In the bottom left-hand corner, he's going to be the Director of Inspections. So this slide gives this slide gives an overview of the key sort of roles that Active Travel England have. They've got 6 main roles: advising and assessing. Sorry, I just realised I didn't spell assess properly. Interacting, influencing, enabling, innovating, activating, and supporting. But essentially, they are a delivery agency, so they're not an advocacy agency. Arguably, maybe the first column, advising and assessing, is going to be their main and most important role, where they will help delivery of schemes, they hold the budget, assessing bids, advising, assisting local authorities. They're also going to be a statutory consultee on planning applications, and the assessing highway authorities and their ability to deliver active travel schemes. They're also going to interact and influence with transport planning in terms of policy and standards, like feeding into standards and collaborating with other government departments such as DFT, National Highways, HS2 and DULAC. So, they're not going to be sort of sitting on their own and working on their own. They're going to be working across the board to, help improve the standard of active travel schemes. One of the other key sort of roles is going to be supporting local authorities and really helping local authorities understand what good means, what good schemes are, and giving them some training and guidance and tools on how to create schemes that do meet the objectives of the guidance, which I'll go into a bit later. So in a nutshell, main roles that Active Travel England have is to manage the budget and support local authorities in delivering high quality cycling, walking schemes. So our role as WSP, we started in January 22 to help support the shadow organisation. When we first started there wasn't actually anyone in post. So we were just working with DFT to help do the functions that ATE will eventually do themselves. We've been working on 6 work streams. The primary 2 work streams have been the spatial planning side and design review side. And as Anna said, we've been supported by 4 other consultants today, Mark McDonald, Phil Jones, Evident Movement and Metis. The other thing that we've been doing is tool development. So we've created some design tools which will help local authorities deliver design proposals, and they're also being used to assess like sort of funding application bids that come in. So essentially our commission has been about like providing the skills and resources for Active Travel England. So this slide shows some of the work that we've been involved in today, and I sort of tried to collate it into sort of 3 main areas. So the first area is the design review and site inspection reviews. So right at the start of the commission, we were involved in reviewing Active Travel 3 funding bids, and we did 134 reviews, and that funding was announced in May, 161 million. We've also worked on other department reviews such as CRSTS, and we are currently working on the LUF2 reviews. So that's what I've been busy doing today. Couple of other sort of side ad hoc type of reviews where, as local authorities are knowing about Active Travel, because I know there's been a couple of presentations that they've done. We've had more sort of people, like local authorities come in asking for advice. So we've worked on reviews where we've helped local authorities come up with better schemes or review the schemes that they've got. At the Active City seminar and conference at the start of July, myself and one of my colleagues were on the Active Travel England stand at design reviews. I had people coming up asking for info on their reviews. Then spatial planning, gosh, that was my voice. So we've helped with piloting the toolkit to review planning applications, the Active Travel element of planning applications. And we've also done a little bit of work for threshold testing to determine which schemes Active Travel England should be getting involved in as a statutory consultee. And then finally, for toolkit development, we've developed 10 design toolkits in conjunction with Brian Deegan, which will be made available to all local authorities for the Active Travel 4 funding application. Sorry, that's very strange. Okay, so anyway, that's a bit of a summary of what we've been doing. So we've been quite busy this year. So moving on to sort of some of the components and elements to determine if Active Travel England actually will create a step change. And the first thing you need is a vision and target. So the 2 key documents that guide this is the gear change document and the cycling CWIS 2 document. So the gear change document is the vision, and the four key themes of the vision are shown in that box there. So happier and greener communities, safe streets, convenient, accessible travel, and it being at the heart of transport decision making. In terms of the targets, the 2 targets in black are from gear change, and the other ones are from CWIS 2. So the key targets are the 50% short journeys in towns and cities by 2030 by active travel modes. But another target is about increasing the walking stages and cycling stages that people do. And then the 3rd target is about increasing children's walking to school. And then moving on to funding, we're seeing like record levels of funding in active travel that we've never seen before. So this slide shows a bit of evolution of funding from CWIS 1 in 2016, where there was 1.2 billion given to active travel. That has been increased to 3.2 billion for CWIS 2. Of that, there's 2 billion which has been ring-fenced to DfT and Active Travel England for active travel schemes, not in majority capital funding, but there are a few others listed on the slide. That 2 billion doesn't include the 80 billion that's been given to TfL as part of their new funding agreement. And just another point to note, that's 80 times the amount of funding that was provided in 2005. So a lot of extra funding. Whether it's going to be enough for Active Travel England to meet all their targets, let's see, but it certainly is a lot more funding than what we've seen in the past. And as you can see, the annual cycling spend per head has gone from £2 per head to £17 by 2025, so over 50, just in 15 years. So quite a lot of additional investment that has been made. Very slow. And then moving on to sort of standards and guidance, all the design reviews and all the planning reviews that have been done are all based on national guidance now. So LTN 120, inclusive mobility. The design toolkits, I understand, are going to be included in the new Manual for Streets document that comes out. So they're all going to be aligned. So hopefully what this will mean is that consistency and design quality and, you know, schemes that are implemented are going to be that much better than what has been in the past, where it's been a little bit ad hoc, and London had their design standards which were quite high, and then the rest of the country sort of did, you know, maybe not as good schemes as what they could do. Just to talk a little bit about the design toolkits, this slide shows a list of the 10 toolkits that have been developed and a bit of a flow chart of when those design toolkits need to be applied. So essentially, if you've got a design like a feasibility design, concept design that has been drafted up in CAD, a route check can be done, that's like on a corridor, junction assessment, area check, it depends what type of scheme it is. If you don't have a design and it's like a line on plan, like you want to put in a cycling corridor, walking corridor from A to B, then there's a toolkit called a route cross section, where basically we can assess whether high quality to standard cycle lanes, traffic lanes, or, you know, footways can fit within a highway boundary corridor. Just a little bit of detail about the toolkit. So for instance, this route check toolkit is sort of what it looks like. It's in Excel. The route check, as I said, is for a corridor. So basically what it checks is themes that are similar to CLOS, which are in LTN 120. So safety, attractiveness, directness, accessibility, cohesion and comfort. And it basically tries to highlight where the critical issues are and the issues that should be overcome in order to make the scheme, you know, safe for everybody. And for the cross-section tool, which I just mentioned, at this stage, you can look at the highway width, as you can see on the side there, and determine what cycle lane widths you can actually fit, and footway widths and carriageway widths you can fit within a highway boundary side to side, to determine whether you're going to get, you know, a scheme that is compliant, or whether there may be, you know, it's not feasible because you just literally won't be able to fit it in. So I suppose this is my last slide, and it summarises key sort of themes I've spoken about, like visions and targets, fundings, guidance and standards. Haven't really spoken much about scrutiny, but at Travel England, if I know there's a few local authorities here, you all got arts to do with local, what's it called? The self-assessment on Active Travel just recently. So that's sort of the first part of the scrutiny. So Active Travel England are planning to do sort of like a league table, you know, depending on how people, I mean, not people, authorities rate themselves, and Active Travel England has assessed those, and I think maybe has come back to local authorities and what their rating is. That will determine like sort of what funding pots made available, but they're also very keen to improve the rating of local authorities, so it's not like you're down the bottom, you're never going to get any money. It's all about like trying to determine what sort of level of support local authorities need to improve their schemes. So I mean, all of this sounds really good. Do you think that Active Travel England is going to make a step change for Active Travel? I think so. I think our team thinks so. You know, they have a clear vision and targets. The funding is committed. It's ongoing. You know, in the past, it's been a bit piecemeal funding. We've now got the highest level of funding that we've ever had. Guidance and standards, there's now national guidance, so everywhere in the country can follow that guidance. And Active Travel England are there to support everybody to ensure that, you know, things just can get better and better in terms of Active Travel division. That's it for me. Thank you.
If there's any questions from anybody who's dialed in, can you just type them in? But Stacey, I'll start off, give people a chance to think about. So a question for you is, how do you think Active Travel England be different to other government outlets?
I mean, I think they're going to be quite different in terms of there will be two-way communication. Like we've already seen that a lot with some of the ad hoc design reviews we've done. Not just a case of Active Travel England saying, you know, your scheme is substandard and you have to go and sort it out. They're really open to, you know, they've had conversations with local authorities, give them suggestions on how to improve. There's training material. Actually, I didn't say that in the presentation, but they're currently pulling together like 15 videos on different aspects of training to give to local authorities to help them improve their skills and also their knowledge of what good looks like, how to use the toolkits. So it's going to be a lot more two-way.
one online and down again. When will Active Travel England be integrated with local authorities such as consultee on planning applications? How would the local authority engage with Active Travel England? Would this be through their cycling and walking?
So Active Travel England.
We can already engage with Active Travel England. I think they've now got a website, an email address set up. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but can contact them through the email. In terms of the planning side and statutory consulting, I think that's sort of going to start next year, towards the end of this year, but like fully kick in next year. So they really are sort of ramping up very quickly.
Any questions on the room? Okay, just got one question on this resourcing. So they've done the capability assessments.
Yeah.
And obviously more money than they've ever had before for cycling. But the skills shortage on, we've got the quality in terms of design, the council on 20, let alone how that integrates with the transport infrastructure, depending on where the priorities are. But do you see both Active Travel England and this is going to create a problem for local authorities and in terms of recruiting the right skill set? Or how do you think the supply chain of all consultants will support that sort of call to action to make sure that we do deliver the quality infrastructure to cycle?
I mean, Active Travel England itself, they've now had a few recruitment ads go out, and apparently they are interviewing in a few weeks' time, and there was quite a lot of applications. In terms of upskilling local authorities, that may be quite challenging, but obviously there are consultants around that can support. But Active Travel England also says that they really are there to help and want to help local authorities with, doing workshops and training so they can, to a certain extent, upskill themselves. And the whole design review toolkit thing at the moment is a little bit of Active Travel England doing that. But I think essentially they want to see in the future that local authorities will do that themselves, so there'll be less of Active Travel England having to do that.
So I'm on Scotland at the moment, and I'm fully aware that the system for actual funding is different than
Yeah.
here in England at the moment. Funding for actual travel goes through Sustrans. Sustrans, so Sustrans is almost the of Scotland. So I just wondered whether, like, setting up of actually looking for inspiration or lessons from that process, because that's been the case for a couple of years now, and I just wondered whether that's been a learning point or.
I'm not really sure, to be honest. I mean, I know that the Boardman and so Brian Deegan, they're like got good links with Scotland, so I think they are, and Wales, so that trying to share lessons and understand, learn from Scotland, Wales. So I think that's probably something they have considered, but I think I can't. Sure.
Basically, Brent Riley here from Chatler Land Rover. So as a line of fire, I was just wondering, in terms of how Active Travel England fits within the planning process, because you mentioned at the start that you will be a statutory consultee on planning applications.
Yeah.
So what's the threshold for planning applications? Is it minor, major, or is there an area? And then how would funding be taken from the major employers? Will it be by S278 contributions or Section 106 contributions?
That's all bit, in terms of the threshold, it is very tricky, complicated bit of work that we did, because obviously it's different for statutory, the thresholds have to be the same for the whole country, so you can't have different levels for cities and rural. So I must admit, I don't know what Active Travel England have decided in terms of thresholds, so I can't really say at the moment. Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. We're watching.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is there any recognition that we could put in effectively internet capital funding without subsequent revenue funding actually be able to upskill anyone? teams.
I mean, I think there is that recognition that essentially the funding is more capital funding based. Yeah, but maybe that's something for the future that the travel England to try and, yeah, overcome.
Isn't that capability assessments?
Yeah.
Capability assessments.
Supporting also to support.
Thank you, Stacey. I think one thing that questions are showing is it's an evolving piece of work still. But thank you for coming in and updating on the best things so far, Stacey. Finally, we have Stephen Arnold, who will be presenting virtually, and Stephen will be presenting on Birmingham's Clean Air Zone. He's been responsible for delivering the overall delivery of the Clean Air Zone since its launch in 2021, and also the day-to-day operation of the scheme. And Stephen will tell you when you're on the screen.
Thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me at the moment. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, Stephen, I'm just waiting for Alan to sort out the tech.
Cool. Okay. So while that's being sorted out in the background, so first of all, a massive apologies for not being there in person. 99% down to my misunderstanding and also assumption that in the world in which we all adapted to, that stuff gets done online all the time. And yeah, well, completely down to my misunderstanding. So apologies for not being there in person. It's been a really interesting set of presentations so far. I think the other thing that I'd like to do as well, before I jump into the slides mainly, is also thank Anne. Anne, I know from her previous role at Birmingham City Council, and Anne and her team did a massive amount of work in terms of getting this scheme off the ground. So I'll be talking about where we've got to really around this, but yeah, you know, massive thank you to Anne and various conversations that we shared on a train together whilst we used to work in the office. So yeah, so how are we going with the slides so far?
You just tell me when you want me to change the slide.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay, yeah. So do you want to go to the first slide then, please? Brilliant, thank you. So the first thing I want to do really as part of this presentation is just remind everybody about the health context as to why we felt that a clean air zone was required, why this particular intervention was required as a policy initiative. Also talk a little bit around the broader policy context and how we actually got to the point at which we had the necessary tools to be able to launch the Clean Air Zone. I'll then talk about a little bit about the actual operation of the scheme, how we enforce that, and then what and how we've supported that introduction through with a range of financial incentives to again help support but also encourage change. And I think the other really critical thing within this is that the Clean Air Zone is enabling change, it is encouraging change, it is accelerating change. And I'll run through some of the numbers that we're seeing around that, not only in terms of our lead indicator of improvements in the rates of compliant and non-compliant vehicles entering the scheme and how that plays out for the various category types, but also most critically, because this scheme is all about reducing the levels of nitrogen dioxide, it is about the impact that is now that we're starting to see in terms of reducing those levels of nitrogen dioxide. So that's a really positive thing as well. I think the final thing that I'll cover off really as part of this presentation is really how, as I said at the beginning, the Clean Air Zone is starting to enable change, broader change, behaviours in changes in travel behaviour, and also how the revenues generated from the scheme have already started to be allocated towards longer term infrastructure changes that support travel improvements, creating more sustainable travel, supporting more sustainable travel choices, but also in some of the smaller schemes that not only create engagement but create more positive environment for people, not least of all some of the funding towards some of those cargo bikes that were Anne was talking about earlier. So as I said at the beginning, the Clean Air Zone has been introduced by Birmingham to address the health issues that are created through poor air quality. In Birmingham alone, there are around about 1,000 early deaths that are attributed to the effect attributed to poor air quality, and it's also linked to chronic diseases such as heart attacks, diabetes, asthma. Poor air quality also disproportionately affects the young, the old, and people living in communities of deprivation. And it is absolutely critically important to a city such as Birmingham, where we have significant, communities, a significant number of communities where there are very high levels of deprivation. It's also important to remember that children who live in high pollution areas are 4 times more likely to have impaired lung function. So there is absolutely a clear need to do something about poor air quality. The pollutant of most concern to Birmingham is nitrogen dioxide. 80% of the nitrogen dioxide produced in the city is from road transport, and 6% of those emissions are from diesel engines. So we have a real clear and present health issue that we can address because we know what the significant source of that is. And the Clean Air Zone is just one of the tools that we're going to be using to help tackle that issue. Okay, so I have the next slide, please. So the broader policy context for this is that the journey towards the Clean Air Zone really started back in 1995 with the last Environment Act. That introduced the requirement for local authorities to monitor and report on air quality, and then started the journey towards air quality management areas and a growing need and awareness around the impacts of poor air quality and the need to do something about it. But really that journey towards the Clean Air Zone has only really accelerated in the last 10 years. But just noting that it has taken 10 years to get to the point where we've been able to introduce this Clean Air Zone. Some of that is through the growing body of evidence that links poor air quality to poor health, but also, being brutally honest, the government was taken to court 3 times by an organisation called Klein Earth. 3 times the government lost, and as a result then introduced a series of ministerial directions to Birmingham in the first instance and 4 other cities, but that list then grew to around about I think 60 cities in total now, or 60 authorities, where there's a ministerial direction in place that says you need to bring forward plans to address the issues of poor air quality in your authorities. And for Birmingham, that, as I said, the single biggest issue that we have is nitrogen dioxide, which is produced by vehicles. So it's a coming together really of that growing body of evidence around the impacts of poor air quality on health, but also that broader policy context, and also the funding that the government brought forward to support the implementation of a scheme of this type, and other measures that other authorities are introducing that have helped us to be able to bring forward this initiative. Okay, so can I have the next slide, please? And Birmingham's not alone in introducing this type of scheme. Within the government's Clean Air Zone framework, Bath introduced a Type C Clean Air Zone in March of last year. Portsmouth introduced a Type B Clean Air Zone. Bradford, Bristol and Newcastle are due to introduce their schemes this year. Sheffield is due to introduce a Type C Clean Air Zone early 2023. I think the jury's out a little bit in terms of what Greater Manchester do for a variety of reasons. But outside of the Clean Air Zone framework, other schemes such as the Ultra Low Emission Zone in London are already in operation and being expanded with potential plans to expand that even further. And in Scotland, they're introducing schemes. So, and Oxford are looking at a zero emission zone. And so all of this stacks up to where various authorities have understood the issues that are created through poor air quality and are using these direct interventions to encourage change. Within the government's framework for clean air zones, there are two types of clean air zone. There's a non-charging clean air zone, and then there's a chargeable clean air zone. Chargeable clean air zones are in 4 flavors: A, B, C, and D. D being the most inclusive, which includes all category types. B being the least inclusive, with the smallest number of category types. And the idea behind the framework is that the local authority develops plans that address the specific issues within its authority, and then brings forward a plan to the government using the Clean Air Zone framework if appropriate, and putting forward a plan that identifies which type of intervention is required for Birmingham, because of the volume of locations where we had exceedances of the legal limit for nitrogen dioxide, and because of just the sheer volumes of traffic that go through the city centre. It was modelled that a type D Clean Air Zone was the only way in which we would achieve the direction from the government, which was to reduce the levels of nitrogen dioxide to within the legal limit in the shortest possible time. And it's also important to remember that the last part of that direction, in the shortest possible time, is the bit that has driven a lot of the design decisions around the operation and the implementation of the scheme. And that is also different to some of the drivers that have been behind some of the design decisions for, say, London's ULEZ and Scotland's low emission zones and Oxford's zero emissions. And I suppose one of the really difficult things within this for drivers, for road users, is just how that variation works for them. And in the eyes of a lot of road users, all they understand is that there are these schemes. They are surely the same sort of scheme. Why wouldn't they be the same sort of scheme? But there are multiple ways in which these work, different charging regimes that apply, and that can be confusing for drivers. So a lot of what we've been doing around the communication and engagement to support the introduction of our scheme is about trying to explain how our scheme works and what that means for people, in order just to reduce some of the inevitable dissatisfaction or disagreement with the scheme in general. Can I have the next slide, please? So Birmingham's Clean Air Zone came into operation on the 1st of June 2021. It is a Type D Clean Air Zone. As I said, it includes all categories of vehicles. It is in place within the middleway, so that's the A4540, the inner ring road really of the city. It provides a useful natural boundary for the scheme. It is relatively clear to people as to the area that's included. The charges that apply 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year, are £8 for cars, taxis and vans, £50 for HGVs, coaches and buses. The rationale for how we ended up at those price points was in part based upon modelling that looked at what sort of price point would be needed to encourage the kinds of change that we needed in the shortest possible time. Part of the decision making that came into the price point that was used was also based on an extensive consultation that was ran in the summer of 2018. And also as well, it is within, again, the framework that is provided by the government to all local authorities. There is a specific price band for the low end and the high end that local authorities can charge. We've come in at the very lowest end of that, but we believe that those price points, and hopefully the numbers I share later will demonstrate this, but these price points have helped to encourage that change. It's also worth noting that the £8 is significantly lower than the charges being applied in London. That's £12.50 per day for cars. And similarly within Bath, they are charging £150 per day for HGVs. We're charging £50. And again, a lot of this is down to the different the composition of the fleets and the challenges that each of the local authorities have faced that have helped influence a lot of that decision making. The scheme itself is enforced with a network of 66 cameras at around about 44 locations. The vast majority of those are on the boundary of the scheme at the entry points and exit points. There are a handful of cameras within to pick up journeys that start within the zone. There's also over 300 signs in place to alert drivers to the fact that the scheme's in operation. The earliest of those start at 2 miles out from the scheme. They're then repeated at regular intervals up to and including on the boundary of the scheme, and then there are signs within the scheme itself. And as I said before, we have supported all of those informational and regulatory signs with paid for advertising through billboards and posters and social media and all those sorts of things, because what we really want from this, and it's very similar to the approach that was used in the run-up to Commonwealth Games, is we don't really want the revenues from the scheme. Now, that may seem like a very, very strange thing to say, but the scheme was not designed to generate revenue. The scheme was designed to generate those improvements in air quality. And the previous cabinet member that looked after the scheme went on the record several times to say that we would be perfectly happy if this scheme generated no revenue at all, because that would mean that only compliant vehicles were entering the zone, and that was our primary goal, to reduce that number of non-compliant vehicles to the absolute minimum in the shortest possible time. However, the scheme is generating revenues, and I'll talk a little bit more at the end of this towards how we are starting to allocate those revenues. Could I have the next slide, please? And as I said at the beginning, one of the really important things to us as part of the introduction of the scheme was to ensure that we were supporting key groups of people that we'd identified through the consultation and through some of the early modelling that we'd done in preparation for the introduction. And we'd successfully bid for funding from the government to support those financial incentives. There's a total package of grants of around about £35 million. Those are split between funding to support low-income workers within the city centre. That's a scrappage scheme and mobility credits. There's also an upgrade and replacement fund that's supporting SMEs in the West Midlands with HGVs, coaches and vans. And then the final part of that is a £15 million package to support Birmingham licensed Hackney carriage and private hire fleet. And we have seen a significant amount of demand from that particular group for this fund. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that's meant in terms of compliance rate within that particular fleet. Could I have the next slide, please? So we're capturing a huge amount of data from the scheme, and we're all right almost from the very beginning. We've been sharing that data through the Brumbreeze website. We've now converted that data into interactive dashboards with a Power BI, and we will be building, and we will continue to build out and share that data, because going on and how we can make further improvements. But what we've seen over the lifetime of the scheme is that on an average day there are around about 95,000 to 100,000 unique vehicles entering through the scheme. Over the course of the last 12 months, the overall trend is downwards in terms of daily volumes. But that is consistent with what we had seen in the previous years. Some of that will also have been impacted through the changes brought about by COVID, with more people working from home. And what we've also seen is that COVID has had a significant impact on how those flows work over the course of the day. The morning peak is largely disappeared, especially on the early parts of after we'd launched. But again, things continue to change as people get more and more used to the to life as it is now. And what we've also been looking at really is what impact other external factors have on those vehicle volumes. And one of the most significant that we saw really was in the run up to Christmas, we were monitoring and watching the growth in daily traffic entering the zone, and as you can see for September, October, November, that volume was steadily increasing. But then once the government introduced updated guidance to work from home with the Omicron variant, we could see from the week commencing the 13th of December that volume of traffic almost dropped off a cliff and changed almost overnight. So again, it's really, really helpful data that we're also sharing with our colleagues in our transport planning team to help inform and just shape some of our policies that we've got around that particular area. Could I have the next slide, please? And this data and what this data is trying to show really is, again, that impact of other factors, not just the clean air zone, on those volumes of traffic and lockdown in that period prior to the launch being the most significant. The other thing that we've been looking at as well is trying to answer the question or the challenge that we had prior to the launch of the scheme of, well, surely that polluting traffic is just going to avoid the area and use the ring road and then take the pollution into another part of the city. And what the graph in the bottom right of the screen shows, or seems to be suggesting, is that that's not actually the case. There have been a small reduction in the volumes of traffic entering the zone in the immediate period after the launch of the scheme. However, that wasn't matched by a similar increase in traffic using the ring road. So again, at the moment, the data suggests that that we're not seeing that displacement, and also the data that we're seeing from the air quality monitoring as well also supports that. But again, we are being very, very cautious about saying that it's not being displaced because yeah, it just requires a little bit more time really before we can get to that point. Can I have the next slide, please? And as I said at the beginning, what we're doing on a monthly basis is tracking that journey towards or that change in terms of compliant versus non-compliant vehicles entering the zone. What this graph is showing is that is the overall fleet, so all vehicles entering the zone, and there has been a reasonably significant amount of change in a relatively short period of time. That the most significant change that we saw was in that immediate period just after launch, and what we saw at the beginning of June, on the 1st of June, around about 18% of the vehicles entering the zone were non-compliant, so in theory subject to the daily fee. But we'd paused payments for the first 2 weeks of the scheme as a deliberate effort to try and give the owners and the drivers of those vehicles a little bit more time to apply for an exemption, make themselves familiar with the payment process and all those sorts of things, use the publicity from the switch on of the scheme to again drive that awareness. And then at the point at which payments did start on the 14th, the rate of non-compliance had dropped significantly, and what you can see here in this graph is it went from 15.2% down to 11.9% in a very, very short period of time. So again, that strongly suggests that this payment mechanism is driving that change, is encouraging people to do something different. We're now, the rate of non-compliant vehicles entering the scheme is now down to 7.8%, so that's a reduction of almost a half in about a year, and we are very, very close to the point at which we'd modelled what the rate of compliance would need to be for the overall fleet in order to start to achieve the changes and improvements in air quality that we were hoping to see. So again, in a relatively short period of time, we have seen a significant amount of change. I have to be really clear that the compliance was happening anyway in the fleet, but again, what we've seen is that rate of compliance, that rate of change to compliance has accelerated, and that's again, we believe a demonstration that the clean air zone is starting to have the desired effect. Can I have the next slide, please? And what this chart shows is how that journey towards compliance is happening within each of the vehicle categories. 88% of all the vehicles entering the scheme are passenger vehicles, so that's the area of biggest interest for us, because we want to ensure that if that's the most significant volume, that we want to try and ensure that the rates of compliance there are as high as possible. And in February of this year, the passenger fleet was at around about 90.7%. It has continued to improve since then. I think it's up to about 92% at the moment, and the modelled rate of compliance is at about 96%. So we're actually very, very close to what we were expecting we would need in order to achieve those objectives around improvements to air quality. The other significant category of vehicles entering the scheme each day are LGVs, or vans, and again we've seen a really steady improvement in terms of the rates of compliance, and again with our latest data we are really close to that modelled compliance point that we were looking for. What the red lines show in these charts is what the do nothing scenario would have been in terms of rates of compliance, and across the board those are significantly higher. HGVs and coaches and buses being perhaps the most interesting, and with coaches and buses now, around about 98 to 99% of the buses and coaches entering the zone are compliant, and that's a really positive change, and a lot of that is down to the hard work by organisations such as National Express West Midlands, which have made a significant commitment to ensuring that only compliant vehicles went into the zone, program of retrofits, and also investment in electric vehicles and hydrogen buses, which is supported with funding from the Clean Air Zone. Can I have a next slide, please? And as I was talking about earlier, there has been a really significant uptake from the Birmingham licensed taxi fleet to the funding that's been provided through the Clean Air Zone. What this chart is showing really is how that rate of compliance has changed over time. These charts go back to 2018. At the beginning of 2018, the private hire fleet was around about 38% compliant. It's now 93% compliant. And actually that data goes back to January. What we're seeing more recently is that the rates of compliance for private hire fleet are around about 97%, which is absolutely brilliant. That's really good. For the Hackney fleet, it's a slightly different journey, but they started from a much lower point. The Hackney fleet was only around about 12% of that fleet was compliant back in 2018. What this chart is showing is the rate of compliance had improved to around about 46%. Since then, we're up to around about 54%, and we estimate there's around about 300 Hackney carriages left that are non-compliant. So we're looking at ways which we can incentivise those drivers to get into more compliant vehicles, and there are added benefits there in driving those more compliant newer vehicles, because it's lower fuel costs, reduce operating costs in other areas as well. So there are additional business benefits to them. Can I have the next slide, please? And perhaps most importantly of all, all of these other indicators of change are, we believe, are leading to improvements in the levels or reductions in the levels of nitrogen dioxide within the Clean Air Zone. That's also, the impact of that is also then starting to spread to the ring road and to the wider city. So what we've been looking at here, and this is all part of an interim report that we published in March of this year, what we're seeing across 37 monitoring locations within the Clean Air Zone, there is around on average 13% reduction in the levels of nitrogen dioxide in the first 6 months of operation of the scheme, and that's when we're comparing 2021 to 2019. And the reason we're comparing with 2019 for this report is because we consider that to be the last normal year versus 2020. We have included a comparison of the data in this just for transparency purposes, and I've included it on this slide. But that is, we believe that it is a good positive reduction in a relatively short period of time. What we've also identified through this work is that there's now, we're starting to look at a handful of locations within the city centre where we continue to have exceedances. Some of these are at new locations where we've put monitoring equipment in place since 2019, and so there's further work there to look at what are the sources of pollution in those areas. But there are other locations such as Cars Lane, which runs through the city centre, and there are a number of other environmental factors that we believe are creating those exceedances that will need to be addressed through potentially other measures and other ways of tackling that issue. But we're starting to narrow down the locations where we've got exceedances because some of those broader changes that have taken place within the fleet. So again, it's creating really positive change. Can I have the next slide, please? The other really important thing through the work that we've been doing with the Clean Air Zone is that it's encouraged a broader ambition to address or improve air quality across the whole of the city. Like every authority, we've previously had a local air quality action plan. The focus of that is on historical or identified areas where there are air quality issues. But what we've tried to do with the Clean Air Strategy is look at a much broader vision, a much broader ambition for how we improve air quality and improve people's health across the city. We published that in January of this year, and we've set out 5 high-level priorities, really: improving the fleet, improving the flow of that fleet, reducing the overall volume, reducing the sources of poor air quality and people's exposure to those that poor air quality, and encouraging and empowering behaviour change. And then similarly, we've started to make a series of pledges as to how we will start to tackle that. The Clean Air Zone remains probably the single biggest thing that we are doing right now, but we've already started to roll out air quality monitors to a school in every single ward of the city, so that's 69 wards in total, and we've made a further pledge to provide and offer air quality monitors to every single school, because it not only gives us data in terms of where some of the issues may be in other parts of the city, but also they're a useful tool to help build awareness, create engagement around the issue, and encourage people to make individual change as well. So this is absolutely the start of a much longer term journey, but there's a real desire to go on that journey. And I think there's also a recognition through the work that we've been doing that the change that we're starting to see within the Clean Air Zone and what people are starting to do also has benefits in terms of health, with people taking more active travel modes, but also feeds into broader ambitions with net zero and addressing climate change, and also helps enable change with the transport plan that we've got for the city as well. So there are multiple benefits that we believe that fall from this policy initiative. Can I have the next slide, please? And really, just to try and wrap up, as I said at the beginning, the Clean Air Zone is generating revenues, and those revenues come from 2 sources. That's the daily fee that we collect, and also from penalty charge notices where people don't pay the daily fee. And we've started to allocate that funding to a range of sources. The first one really was the piloting of hydrogen buses. So we've supported the purchase of 20 hydrogen buses, which will be operated by National Express West Midlands. We've also invested or allocated funding towards city centre pedestrianisation, public realm improvements, funding towards the upgrades that have already started to take place at University Rail Station and the delivery of the new Camp Hill Rail Station. So supporting some of the broader ambitions within Transport for West Midlands and the combined authority. We've also allocated funding towards cross-city bus projects, and a little bit more locally as well. We're allocating funding to the creation of a Clean Air Fund, which will provide all of the wards in the city with funding for local locally driven projects that either generate awareness or engagement with the issues around air quality or help create change. And the last one that we've allocated funding to is the Transport and Environment Programme, which looks at expanding some of the work we're doing around provision of bikes, safe school streets, and a number of other schemes that again encourage that longer term behaviour change. So we're not only seeing the Clean Air Zone as a driver of change in the short term in terms of that directive that we've had from the government to create change in the shortest possible time, but we're using those revenues to create that longer term step change that we believe we need as a city. And as I said, the Clean Air Zone helps to encourage broader change and moving beyond that simple objective of compliance with the emissions standard for the Clean Air Zone. So we've provided funding to support the rollout of the fast and rapid EV charging network, and we'll also be looking at how we can support the city's longer term ambition to have a publicly accessible network of around about 3,600 charging points. So hopefully that's giving you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of how we got to the introduction of the Clean Air Zone, the policy context that was used to create the Clean Air Zone, and also some of the changes that we're starting to see from the zone. Thank you.
One here from Dan again. Was it a long and costly undertaking to implement the infrastructure, such as setting up the cameras along the boundary of the Clean Air Zone?
So sorry, can you just repeat the beginning of that? Was it a costly?
Long and costly undertaking.
Was it a costly undertaking? The funding that we had to support the delivery of the infrastructure for the scheme was around about 15 million pounds. Is that costly? I think that's a bit in the eye of the beholder. But that's broadly how much it costs to implement the infrastructure for the scheme. So that covered the cameras, the signage, the back office systems that were required to deliver the scheme.
I'm not sure who this one's from, but how much of the current transport emissions is from diesel trains through the zone?
No, that's a really good question. And so 80%, as I said in that almost, I think the very first slide, 80% of the nitrogen dioxide of the scheme is from road transport. So the remainder comes from other sources. Rail is included within that. We do have monitoring locations around the three stations within the city centre. And what we're most concerned about is where we're increasingly seeing residential developments close to those rail stations, because one of the things we're trying to ensure is that people aren't exposed to nitrogen dioxide if it can be prevented. So we're monitoring that closely. It's also worth noting that the rail industry itself are investing significantly in new rolling stock, hybrid and purely electric, but a lot of that really does depend upon the electrification of the main line. With the recent the Chiltern Line franchise was recently up for renewal, and one of the things ourselves and Westminster submitted to the government around that was trying to encourage a commitment of whoever had that franchise to commit to improving their or reducing the emissions from their operations. Network Rail also have its own plan in place to reduce emissions as well.
Mark Frost here, Chair of the Transport Planning Society. It was a great, detailed summary of what is an excellent transport plan, but also really good public health intervention. I'm quite closely involved in some of the discussions in London around the expansion of the ultra low emission zone. I know that one of the key issues there is all around the sort of equity concerns around whether these are interventions that disproportionately target those people that are worse off from an income perspective. So I just wondered if, across your monitoring, whether you get a feel for whether this intervention has disproportionately impacted on those with lower incomes, lower socioeconomic groups. Are we seeing more, the same level of driving by richer people, for example, and less driving by poorer people? How is that playing out, in the usage of the network, and what sort of mitigations have you put in place?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question. One of the things we did very, very early on in this, in the development of how the scheme would potentially operate, was to look at the was to undertake a distributional impact assessment, and one of the questions we did want to look at really was, would the people who would potentially most benefit from something like this in terms of improvements air quality, or then be disproportionately impacted through the charges that we applied. And some of the interesting things that came out of that were that people with lower income households are less likely to own more than one vehicle in the first place. Also, a lot of the journeys that people were taking in those households tended to be shorter, and more people in low income households were more likely to use bus as a mode of transport to get to work and things like that. So there are a range of factors there that mean that people in lower income households are not necessarily disproportionately impacted through this kind of intervention. However, one of the things that we were very keen to do was to ensure that there was support in place. So a couple of things that we did have in place was the exemptions and financial support. So we had a 12-month exemption in place from the daily fee for people on low income, so earning less than £30,000 per annum, who work within the city centre. So there was anybody who worked in the city centre for 18 hours or more per week earned less than £30,000 per annum. They were given an exemption of 12 months from the introduction of the scheme. And at the same time, there is the scrappage and mobility credit scheme that is providing £2,000 for that same group to scrap a non-compliant vehicle and be provided with the funding to get into a compliant vehicle or to use the mobility credits. Now, I think the interesting thing with that is that around about 20 to 25% of the applicants to that scheme have gone for the mobility credit option. They've scrapped a non-compliant vehicle and have taken the £2,000 towards travel credits through Transport for West Midlands. It would be nice if more of them were doing that, but there is a desire for amongst some people to take that option. The other thing that we did was for residents within the clean air zone, and there are a significant number of households within the clean air zone that are living in deprivation. So what we've done is we've provided a 2-year exemption for residents within the clean air zone from the daily fee, and actually we've just been through a renewal process for people with that exemption. Each year we ask them to renew that particular exemption, and of those people that haven't renewed, we've gone back out to them and said, okay, well, why didn't you renew? And around about 25 to 30% of those people haven't renewed because they've got rid of their non-compliant vehicle and got into a compliant vehicle. Originally, we had included a bid for financial support, some kind of scrappage scheme for residents that we put to the government. That was rejected when the government came back to us on our business plan, but potentially there's maybe something else that we might be able to do around that, because again, what we want to ensure is that this is as smooth a transition as possible, and to ensure that wherever possible we try and support and encourage change rather than this just being a sledgehammer.
Right, thanks, Steve.
No, we're overrunning slightly, but Simon in the room's got. There is one question here as well.
So this is from Lee Kennedy. Is the clean air strategy becoming encompassed in travel plan policy, especially regarding schools and people pick up and drop off policy agenda?
Sorry, could you just repeat that just so I understand that question?
Is the clean air strategy becoming encompassed in travel plan policies, especially regarding schools and pupil pick-up and drop-off policy agenda?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question as well. Thank you for that. Yeah, one of the things that we did as part of the preparation of the clean air strategy was to ensure that we'd discussed it with colleagues in travel planning, travel demand, just to ensure that there was alignment there with all the policies and the ambitions that are set out within the transport plan. We had really extensive conversations with our colleagues in public health, because again, there are similar activities that are taking place within our public health team, and we're trying to ensure we've got a complementary policy and strategy that's in place that starts to bring those things together. We also spoke to our colleagues in planning as well, because some of the planning decisions then have a playback to whether or not we can achieve some of those goals. I wouldn't say there's necessarily complete cohesion between all those things, but increasingly what we're starting to get is goal alignment across those areas around some key themes that are critically important to the organization. So yeah, I think we are starting to make progress there. And I think the other thing that we've been doing as well with the rollout of the air quality monitors to schools is to ensure that we are absolutely working with the schools team within our travel demand area, because they have that day-to-day contact with schools through the Safe School Streets program, ModeShift Stars, and those sorts of things. So we have to be able to leverage those sorts of conversations. That's critically important. So yeah, so I think we are starting to get there. I don't think it's perfect, not by any stretch of the imagination, but we are starting to get there.
Very quick question from Simon.
Well, hopefully the answer is quite quick as well. So you alluded to the fact that there's change in the fleet's happening anyway, and I think to a large extent what you're doing is accelerating that change in the fleet positively. And so when did your modelling say we can switch it off?
That's okay. Unfortunately, I don't think that's a very quick answer to that question. So as I said at the beginning, the directive that we've had from the government is to create change, to create positive, to achieve compliance with the legal limit in the shortest possible time. So our starting point really to be able to go, can we switch this off, is first of all, have we achieved compliance with the legal limit at all of the monitoring locations within the clean air zone? At the moment, we're not. Like as I said before, we've got around about 6 or 8 locations, depending upon how you count it, where we still have exceedances. So we need to get to that point first. Our modelling suggested that we should start to achieve that 2 years after the scheme goes live. So that's at the point at which all of the local exemptions fall away. We should start to be able to achieve that. But the way in which the reporting cycle works is that we're getting the data on an annualized basis. So it's almost a year after we start to do that. So we'd start to get an indication that we are at that point of a success or compliance, probably about 3 years after the launch of the scheme. We then have to go through a period of stabilisation where we can demonstrate to the government that if we were to remove that scheme, would the problem return? So basically we're looking for sustainability. So you're looking at least 5 years after the scheme goes live before you could begin to make a decision about whether or not you would want to remove it.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. And I'd also like to thank Anne and Stacey for coming along and presenting, and thank you all for coming as well. Please don't disappear. We've got canapes and drinks out there for you to do some networking and everything. But if we can just thank our speakers in the normal way, please.